Raiders and Broncos, division rival, Thursday night football. Strange things happen. Denver 7-2, Raiders are 2-6. Let's talk about this matchup kicking off Week 10. That plus more coming up on Thursday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for November 6, 2025.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Definitely appreciate you. If you're catching the show wherever you find your favorite podcast or you're checking us out by way of the YouTube page, we appreciate both. Show grows each and every day because of your support and the great job that my man Ari does behind the scenes, making sure he looks good and sounds good, or he looks good, we look good, and sounds good each and every day. We shout him out. We appreciate him. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. I'm on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254. Normally, we've got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line for you, 707-654-4693. No calls or texts on today's show. It is a crossover edition. If this is the first time that you're listening to or viewing the show on the Thursday, this is when the host of the other team up on the schedule for the Raiders joins the show. This time it's the Denver Broncos, Thursday Night Football. Cody Roark does a great job, Locked On Broncos. Myself and him will talk all things storylines. We'll talk all things matchups and also keys to victory for both Denver and the Raiders. We call it the crossover edition. Every single team that's in action does it across the Locked On Podcast Network. So that's what we'll do on today's show. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all one word to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. So let's go ahead and jump into it. You know the records. Denver comes in 7-2. They have the best record in the National Football League. Two other teams are tied at 7-2. They lead the AFC West, and we know the Raiders are the bottom feeders right now in the AFC West at 2-6. But it's Thursday night football. Crazy things happen, and it's a division rival game, so anything could happen. So let's go ahead and jump into the biggest storylines between the Broncos and the Raiders, part one of the crossover edition on today's Locked On Raiders podcast.
Q, great to see you, my man. I always love being able to do these crossover shows. We get a chance to chop it up here as both of our teams are going to face off here on Thursday night football. Let's get into the biggest story here. What is the biggest story for your Las Vegas Raiders coming into this AFC West matchup in primetime action on Thursday night?
Well, Cody, it's always great to, be a part of the show with you, and talk a little Raiders and Broncos. But, man, it's been a wild, short week for the Raiders. I mean, they have this tough loss at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then, boom, all of a sudden they turn around, they trade Jacoby Myers to those Jacksonville Jaguars. And, oh, by the way, they're still preparing for a game coming up on Thursday. So, I mean, the NFL doesn't slow down. And when you're playing on a Thursday night, it comes even quicker. And so that's what the Raiders' challenge is how do they, move on from one of their better wide receivers in Jacoby Myers, and who's going to step up and really fill that void. So that's really the storyline that I'm looking at, right? Can they put that loss to the Jaguars behind them quickly because they have to, and then all of a sudden have some other guys step up into that role? So I'm looking at a guy like second-round pick Jack Bech right out of TCU. What is he going to do? This is a guy that's got 7 catches on the season his rookie year. Dante Thornton Jr. out of Tennessee, he's only got 5 catches his rookie year and was a healthy scratch on Sunday against Jacksonville. So are one of these guys going to step up? Are they going to fill that void, or is it going to be all the Brock Bowers show, maybe Michael Mayer and Trey Tucker? How does Chip Kelly, how do the Raiders really compensate for a very good set of hands in Jacoby Myers, a really good route runner, a guy that just seems to find a way to get open and make himself available? How do they make up for his loss? To me, that's going to be the biggest storyline for this team going into this short week, this game on Thursday.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you about, too, because I've been following the conversation this week, especially after they traded away Jacoby Myers. But you guys just recently brought in Tyler Lockett. As we know, Pete Carroll loves Tyler Lockett. I saw some conversation that, okay, what does that mean for Jack Bech out of TCU in terms of his snap counts? And I think he didn't play any offensive snaps against the Jaguars.
Yeah, no offensive snaps against Jacksonville, and Dante Thornton Jr. was a healthy scratch.
So what do you think that'll be this week? Do you think it'll be more Tyler Lockett? I mean, obviously, I know Trey Tucker's their speed guy. He's very fast. I know he was from following your show in the offseason, I know he was the guy at training camp making the big plays downfield. And then, of course, there is the boogeyman of that offense, which we all know is Brock Bowers, who, what a welcome addition back for him watching this past week. Over 12 catches, 3 tutties. How do you think the Raiders come into this week trying to game plan against this ultra aggressive Broncos defense?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more than, or it needs to be more than the Brock Bowers show, because I know the Denver Broncos have that really good defense, and I know they're going to key in on him, knowing that, hey, that's Geno Smith's guy, right? And even in plays that happened against Jacksonville, I saw times where Geno was just looking at Brock only. And there was other guys that were open on the route, but he saw 89, and that's not a bad place to go. That's not a bad place to get comfortable. But these defensive players and defensive coordinators get paid too. And they're going to lock in on that and say, hey, just jump 89, right? Just make sure that you're right there. Get ready to jump that route because Geno's going to go to him. So that's why I'm saying a guy like Jack Bech and Dante Thornton Jr., they're going to have to step up now. I mean, it's one thing to be a rookie and have a learning curve. The learning curve's gone when you trade your veteran wide receiver, as far as I'm concerned. Now your learning curve is done. Now the team is looking at you saying, okay, Rook, it's time to step up. So now everyone's going to have to do a little bit more heavy lifting. Geno's going to have to get selective as well. He can't just lock in on one guy. And unfortunately, that's what he was on Sunday. And again, it was great to see Brock Bowers out there. As you mentioned, 12 catches, had 3 touchdowns on the day. But man, you've got to be able to spread the ball around. You got to be able to get other guys involved, or else it's going to go the other way. And especially with a Denver Bronco team that creates a lot of turnovers, that's a recipe for disaster for Thursday night.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what the biggest storyline here is for the Broncos this week. We all know no Pat Surtain in this game. This is going to be the first time. We'll highlight a little bit later. This is the first time that they played, when Brock Bowers has been on the field, where PS2 is not going to be out there. PS2's done a really great job of neutralizing that threat in previous matchups. So that'll be something we look forward to maybe seeing how it goes this week. I think the biggest story here is, can the Broncos offense finally piece together a game where it's not just fourth quarter heroics, and that they can play effective football in the first quarter, second quarter, and the third quarter. They have yet to play a complete game so far, Q. And the crazy thing about it is they're on a 6-game winning streak.
Right.
Thursday puts them at 7 games, 1 in a row, which is crazy here. We know that this Broncos team here, at least in Denver, they're talented, but they're not playing their best football yet, which can be a scary thing here, is that they can find a way to do that. What is the story here with this Raiders defense this week, and maybe how they might try to play Bo Nix and this Broncos offense that's been kind of so up and down so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, it all starts up front. I mean, Patrick Graham's defense is all based off of getting pressure on the quarterback with the front four, not having to blitz. And unfortunately for the Raiders, they haven't got home enough, right? Only having 16 sacks on the season. They do have pressures. Obviously, Max Crosby is Max Crosby. But, Cody, it's been the same song and dance for the Raiders for a long time in their defense. Who is the true Robin to Max Crosby's Batman? They still have not identified one. They've been trying to do it for years, going back to Chandler Jones, Malcolm Kuntz. Obviously, he's been there. Tyree Wilson was drafted to be that guy. Like, there's been guys that have been brought in. They obviously brought Christian Wilkins in to be a force from the interior, and that didn't work out. He only played 5 games. They still don't have that true Robin, and so it's all on Max Crosby, and that's just realistically, that's not going to get it done. So this team has not been able to really maximize, I think, their ability defensively. The cover 3 that they're running, the soft zone that they're running, it seems like there's a lot of holes in that zone where wide receivers could just sit down and make themselves available for the quarterback. So ultimately, this game is going to come down to, the Raiders defensive line has got to have to get pressure on Bo Nix. They're going to have to frustrate him, rattle him a little bit, and he's tough to rattle, and not to mention he can run, as you know. So they're going to also have to kind of cage him in, as opposed to just pinning their ears back and trying to get after him. They're not going to be able to, lose Contain. If they lose Contain, they're going to lose him, and they're going to most likely lose the game.
One of the bigger strengths of the Broncos offense this season has really been their run game. They're one of the top 5 units right now in terms of rushing yards per game. Last week, the Raiders' defense is coming off a performance where they let Jacksonville go for over $150 on the ground. What is the story here with this Raiders run D? Is it more so that? Because I even saw something as well as Devin White, as we know who he can be. He's also one of the top leaders in missed tackles so far this season. What is the story here with this Raiders run D?
Yeah, they tackled terribly against Jacksonville. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Right? They did not tackle well at all. And honestly, going into that game, I knew Jacksonville was going to want to run the ball because they hadn't ran the ball very well the 2 games before that one. And they did, right? Over 40 times they ran the rock, and like you said, went over $150. And that's the strength of the Raiders defense has been so far, is really slowing down the run and stopping the run. So to me, that's a huge red flag. Wait a minute, hold on. That's one of your strengths, and you just got gashed like that. So the linebackers, Landon Roberts, Devin White, Jamal Adams, right? These guys, they're better at getting downhill and trying to stop the run, right? Jamal Adams loves to play around the line of scrimmage and even try to get after the quarterback, but when that all of a sudden gets compromised, you're in trouble. So the Raiders got to get back to the drawing board and figure out how to stop the run first and foremost, because if not, then the Broncos are going to have an opportunity to run all day long on them, and that's going to be a problem. I don't know how they can really play a good, sound, quality defensive game if they can't stop the run, because then all of a sudden it's pick your poison. So that's the first thing that they're going to have to be able to do is stop the run with Denver.
I'll say watching the film, they definitely missed Trevon Moehrig. That's a guy I feel like would have been so great to have on this defense for them this season, especially on the outside. I know Sean Payton last year, when talking about facing the Raiders, they mentioned Trevon specifically. Now, obviously, he's not on the Raiders anymore there. We'll see where things are at here. This is going to be an interesting matchup. Thursday night games are always weird because you don't really have a chance to install a full-on game plan and get practice reps at full speed. It's walkthroughs for everybody, essentially, and that means we'll see an interesting game potentially here.
So that was part one right there of our conversation. Cody Roark from Locked On Broncos and myself talking all things storylines. Coming up in segment number 2, we'll talk about the matchups. What are we really going to be focused in on tonight, Thursday Night Football, Week 10 action? We'll talk about that coming up. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a couple great sponsors that we have on the show, and the first one is Mizzen and Main. You know the saying, look good, feel good? The problem is that most dress clothes only check one of those boxes. They look sharp, but they feel stiff, hot, and high maintenance. That's where Mizzen and Main come in. Mizzen and Main makes classic menswear with performance fabric, so it's effortless, look sharp, and feel comfortable. They actually invented the performance fabric dress shirt over 10 years ago, and they've perfected it ever since. So their shirts are stretchy, moisture wicking, wrinkle resistant, and machine washable. You know what that means? No ironing and no dry cleaning. I actually had my homeboy Corey in town just the other day, and he said, Q, do you have an iron? I know that you always used to say wrinkles were an opinion. I still believe that. Mizzen and Main, you don't have to worry about wrinkles. You can go from office to dinner, even out on the golf course, and still feel comfortable all day. It's the feel of athletic wear, but the look of professional menswear. Right now, Mizzen and Main is offering all listeners of the Locked On Raiders podcast 20% off your first purchase at mizzenandmain.com with promo code LOCKEDONNFL20. That's Mizzen, spelled M-I-Z-Z-E-N, and Main, M-A-I-N.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL20 for 20% off. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen and Main in stores in select states. I also want to tell you about PrizePicks. You and I, we make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, the NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action. And if you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 players' stats, and if you get them right, you win, just like that. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere PrizePicks operates. That includes Cali, Texas, and Georgia. You could pick favorite players like Mahomes, Steph Curry. You can mix and match, football and NBA, whatever the case may be. They even have the new stacks feature. It's a game changer. You can now pick more on Steph's points, threes, and assists in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leave early with the injury reboot saves your lineup from a loss. Download the PrizePicks apps today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Continuing with the crossover edition, Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, and myself talking about Week 10 action. Kind of cool to have a game tonight, right? Thursday Night Football. Normally we do the game preview. Well, this is going to be the game preview. Keys to victory. I always give you that. That's what this whole show is going to be. So you heard about the biggest storylines in segment number 1. Now it's time for the biggest matchups. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. AFC West Divisional Showdown, the Broncos and the Raiders. What is going to be the biggest matchups that Cody and myself are looking for? Here we go.
Q, let's dive into key matchups to watch from the Las Vegas Raiders perspective. Which matchup are you eyeing specifically here for Thursday Night Football in such a short week where you don't really get to install a full-on game plan? We talked to players in the locker room this week, and they say it's really about just going back to fundamentals because you don't get those full-speed practice reps as you're just trying to get your body right for Thursday night. From the Raiders' perspective, which matchup has your eye?
Well, I'll tell you, man, it's funny you mentioned fundamentals because for me, the matchups are going to be about fundamentals. And I think it's the defensive line, right? I think it's that front four. How can they be aggressive? How can they slow down Denver? Can they I don't want to say have their way with the offensive line. I don't think they're going to have the way with anyone's offensive line, but can they be productive against the Broncos offensive line, and can they slow down the run? If they can slow down the run, then it's going to start to play into the factor what they want to do, which is pin their ears back and try to rattle Bo Nix. But if they can't stop the run, then there's no reason for Bo Nix to drop back 25, 30 times, right? He can just continue to hand the ball off like you saw the Jacksonville Jaguars do and just run up and down the field against the Raiders. And so I really think it's going to be the matchup of the defensive line against that offensive offensive line. The battle of the trenches, we talk about it all the time. But for this game, knowing that Sean Payton's going to want to run the ball, and obviously there's some dudes there in Denver that can get it done. I mean, I'm watching some of the Broncos game a couple weeks ago, and I want to say, was it R.J. Harvey that had a run about 30-some yards to the house where he didn't even get touched? Like, there was not even a guy that touched him. I was like, wait, does somebody want to put a hand on him? It's like one of those where I know if Sean Payton could go ahead and hand the ball off and continue to do that, he'll do that. Obviously, Bo Nix has a strong arm, can throw the ball around the yard. But, man, it makes life so much easier if your running game is going. So I think that the biggest challenge for the Raiders is going to be, can that front four, can those linebackers come downhill, slow down the run, stop the run, and make the Broncos one-dimensional. So really that's the matchup that I'm looking for defensively for the Raiders to have a little bit of success against the Broncos.
Q, I think this is going to be the most important matchup of the game, and I'm glad you highlighted it because so much of the Broncos' offensive line, they've been highly graded by a lot of different metrics, right? But the idea of what we see with this offense and Denver and their identity, I really think it is to run the football, and everything else would open up for Bo Nix. There's been times this season where the Broncos simply haven't committed enough to the run. Now, even though they're a top 5 rushing offense right now in the NFL, that's great and all. Some of those numbers are skewed a little bit late there. Like, there are times where the Broncos, they'll get the run game going. I think last week against the Houston Texans, as we know, that's a very good defense down there that DeMeco Ryans has. J.K. Dobbins got on a little bit of a hot start, 3 carries for 24 yards early on. And then the Broncos just went into this habit of throwing, I think, 5 or 6 straight times after that. And you have incompletions. It stops the clock. And then all of a sudden you're punting. The Broncos can't get into this formula against the Raiders on a short week. And I've always said it this way. Even though that the Raiders are 2-6, they're sitting in a position right now where if they can try to poke holes in other teams' seasons, they will find a way to do that. They'll try to find a way to capitalize on that. The run game is going to be key. And I think from our perspective in Denver, the biggest frustration has been not consistently sticking with the run, even though the production has been there in terms of the Broncos rushing offense and the output per game this season. They don't stick with it when they should. And then it forces Bo Nix to just go out there and throw. You have to have balance. And hopefully this is a game where the Broncos can do that. My matchup that I'm going to go to here, I think, is going to be how the Broncos defense, which is one of the top units right now in the NFL, how do they prepare for Brock Bowers? Because as I mentioned earlier, in the 2 times that the Broncos have faced off against the Raiders, granted, different quarterback, Gardner Minshew, I think Aiden O'Connell in one game, Brock Bowers has been the guy that goes off against everybody, but he hasn't necessarily gone off exactly against the Broncos when Pat Surtain is covering him. But there is no Pat Surtain in this game. It is Riley Moss. It is second-year cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain and a combination of Jahdae Barron and the nickel corner Jaquan McMillan. I don't think we're going to see a game plan here where the Broncos have one guy follow Brock Bowers specifically. I just don't think that they can do that. I think that they're going to play their cornerbacks just based, field, boundary, situationally. I don't see them matching up and saying, hey, if they're going to move Brock, we're going to follow. I think they like Riley Moss against Trey Tucker, speed versus speed there in that regard. I'm very curious to see how Denver comes out and tries to game plan for him. Because, look, we're talking so much also about Brock Bowers, but then there's Ashton Jeanty, who I think could be multifaceted, not only as a runner, he runs through contact with ease. He's a guy that can also impact you out of the backfield as well. I think that's where maybe Drake Greenlaw is going to come into the equation here for the Broncos defense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Ashton Jeanty because it's funny when you're talking about the run game and the fact that the Broncos don't really commit and stick with the run game. I feel like that, I feel like I'm saying the same thing that you say when it comes to the Raiders offense because, look, Jeanty will get, like last week, 2 carries to start the game for 17 yards, and then Chip Kelly decided to call 3 pass plays, and then they have to punt. It's like, wait, hold on, you're having some success. Go ahead and rock with it. Let the guy that you drafted number 6 overall be that guy that you drafted number 6 overall, but they haven't truly committed to him as the focal point of the offense. And now they get Brock Bowers back, and that was great. I mean, he was out for 3 weeks, so what he brings to the table. But yeah, that matchup with whoever decides or however they decide that they're going to defend Brock Bowers, that's going to be huge. How is Ashton Jeanty going to play a role in this, right? I mean, he's a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. The Raiders don't really emphasize that too much. He did catch 5 passes last week. I think he's a 20-5 guy, Cody. I think he runs the rock 20 times and catches 5 passes a game. I think that's a good recipe for Jeanty moving forward. He only got 13 carries last week, so we'll see if they start to listen to me at some point. I know I'm loud I'm the loudest dude in the room. They got to be able to hear me. I don't know if they listen to me. It's a difference. You can hear me, but you might not listen to me. So I'd like to see them get Ashton Jeanty more involved. I mean, there's a reason why you took him as high as you did, because he's a big-time playmaker. So how could you make that chess match, right? How can Chip Kelly use Ashton Jeanty in his favor against his Broncos defense?
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting too. And I'm curious to see how maybe Chip Kelly tries to adjust against the Broncos pass rush. Right now, they lead the NFL by a wide margin in sacks. 40 sacks through 9 games right now. They had 63 total last year through the entire 17-game stretch. They're averaging around 4 or 5 a game at this point here. So my next matchup that I got my eye on is obviously Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito against the outside offensive tackles here of the Las Vegas Raiders, trying to get after Geno Smith. What has been the story from Geno from a pocket standpoint, from a pressure standpoint this season? How has he evolved around that? Because I know he's throwing a lot of interceptions this season. Is that because of pressure primarily, or is that just because he's staring guys down?
Well, it's a combination of the two, right? He is definitely staring guys down, but he's been under pressure as well, right? I mean, so this is one of these games that this matchup that you're talking about, the Broncos defense getting after the quarterback, this one concerns me a lot, right? I mean, the Broncos are having a historic season when it comes to the sacks that they're getting, and Geno's taking sacks, right? I mean, he's a guy that can run, but he doesn't really run very well, and he doesn't know how to slide. Like, he just looks like it hurts when he slides, right? It just, he clearly is a guy that didn't play baseball back in the day, right? He doesn't have that sliding in the second skill set, but it's just, man, he takes a lot of sacks, and this Raiders offensive line is still a work in progress. With Colton Miller being out and he's on IR right now, Stone Forsythe is their left tackle. DJ Glaze is their right tackle. He's still trying to round into form. He's only a second-year guy. JPJ is their best offensive lineman right now. He's at the right guard spot, and I think he does a lot better job rush, blocking than he does pass blocking. So that's something to pay attention to. And then, there's center, right, is a guy in Jordan Meredith that's just learned how to play the center position. So, and then Dylan Parham at the left guard spot, but he's just kind of there. This is a work in progress, man. This could end up being, as I talked about the trenches earlier, this could end up being how the game is won or lost for either team. If the Raiders could find a way to protect Geno, they could be in a good position because he can't get the ball out and get it to the playmakers. But, man, if they struggle to protect him, it's going to be a long day at the office. And so far, this offensive line has done a pretty rough job when it comes to blocking for Geno Smith.
One thing the Broncos can't forget is last year when Geno Smith was a member of the Seattle Seahawks, he had a big-time rushing touchdown against him on a key third-down situation. So have to account for him, have to account for the wheel route from the running back out of the backfield. We'll see if the Raiders try to take advantage of some of the earlier issues the Broncos had with stopping that play and also maybe trying to avoid Geno turning back the hands of time with his legs in Thursday night's game here.
There's the biggest matchups right there between the Denver Broncos and, of course, the Raiders. So coming up in segment number 3, keys to victory. What is it going to take for both teams to come away with the victory? The Denver Broncos been finding ways to win. The Raiders, not so much. So what is it going to take on tonight? You'll hear about it coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor we have on the show, and that is Gametime. NFL season, it is more than almost halfway over, really. Honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be real about it. Getting tickets could be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it can become frustrating. That's why you need to use Gametime. That's the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is actually the price that you're going to pay. The app, they make it super simple. You can see the exact view from your seat before you buy. They've got zone deals. What are zone deals? You pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way you'll buy tickets. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into keys to victory for both the Broncos and the Raiders. What is it going to take for one of these two teams to come away with the W and kick off Week 10? Well, we'll jump into that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which again is PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. So, keys to victory for the Broncos, keys to victory for the Raiders. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast.
Q, let's dive into how these teams are going to win, because I think really for the Broncos perspective this week, 6-game winning streak, a matchup looming next week with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Right now, with Denver sitting atop of the division, the number one thing that they must avoid is overlooking this Raiders team, who I mentioned earlier is in a perfect position to poke some holes. So if the Raiders are going to poke some holes in the Broncos season here on Thursday Night Football, what is it that they have to do to come out on top with a victory?
Well, first I'll start defensively. I think they're going to have to create a couple turnovers. I really do. And this is not something that's a calling card of the Raiders defense. It's not something that they just hang their hat on and they know that they're going to come up with some turnovers. But I do think that they need to steal a couple possessions in this one. I really do. I mean, there's something about this Raiders offense. It's not clicking on all cylinders. So a couple short fields could help them, put them in really good position to get into the end zone. So somehow, some way, they've got to create some turnovers. They're going to have to get some pressure on Bo Nix. Max Crosby's going to need to have a Max Crosby type day, and somebody is going to have to step up and help him out. And I don't know who that is because, look, we've been talking about someone stepping up and helping him out for a while, and it really hasn't come to fruition. I do like Jonah Laulu, what he's been able to bring from the defensive tackle position. He's not in there all the time, but, I mean, he's got 4 sacks on the season. Max has 5, and those are the 2 leading, sack artists for the silver and black. And it's wild to think how many sacks the Broncos have, and the Raiders are struggling. Like I said, they only have like 16 on the season so far. So clearly not enough, but a couple turnovers are going to need to be had for the Raiders defensively to put their offense in a good position. And then, Cody, offensively, I think it's really simple. I think it's the Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty show. And I know that there's plenty of other guys to get the rock too. Trey Tucker, we talked about him. Michael Mayer, another really good tight end. I'd like to see him get more involved. Looking at the rookies, Dante Thornton, Jack Besh, can they, provide a little something, a little spark to the Raiders offense? But it's got to go through Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty, right? Chip Kelly's got to get creative. You can't just, feed Brock every single play, every single pass play, feed it to him because the Broncos are smart. They're going to jump those routes, going to take it the other way, but got to get creative how they use those guys, right? Passing game, run game, but they've got to be heavily involved. I'd like to see Ashton Genty get way more involved than we saw him against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, finally, you just got to protect Geno Smith. If you don't protect Geno Smith, he's going to be on his back. He was the guy who was second last year in Seattle when it came to sacks, right behind Caleb Williams. I think he got sacked 68 times and Geno got sacked 50. Well, he's on pace to get sacked a ton of times more. So they've got to protect him as well. And that's not going to be a very easy task when you look at this Denver Broncos team that's very opportunistic when it comes to getting to the quarterback. So, I mean, it sounds like a simple game plan, but really, it's sometimes you just got to keep it simple, stupid, right? You got to use the KISS method and roll with it. And the Raiders haven't really done a very good job of doing that. So I think it's back to basics, back to fundamentals for this team if they're going to have a chance on Thursday against Denver. What about for you?
I think that's the thing. Like you mentioned, obviously trying to force takeaways here on this Broncos team. Bo Nix has thrown a couple of interceptions the last couple of weeks where, he floats it a little high and inside against the Texans. Against the Cowboys, he tries to do a no-look pass and ends up getting picked, and Denver's defense starts off in rough field position. Bo has kind of had these moments this year where he's kind of had a little bit of a slow start. So the one thing I think the Broncos offense has to avoid against the Raiders here on Thursday night is coming out there. You can't turn the football over early on. You have to protect it. Obviously, I think you have to maximize every possession that you get. I like the idea of the KISS method, the keep it simple, stupid method. The offense for Denver would benefit from that at times because sometimes Sean Payton gets a little too fancy with some of his play calls. You get like the tricky end arounds, the motions. You get like the crazy setups where you motion one guy, fake the handoff to him, you fake the handoff to the running back, and then you roll out on a play action pass. I mean, some longer developing stuff. I don't think that's going to necessarily work consistently against the Raiders when you talk about that pass rush presence of Max Crosby, who in every game he's played against the Broncos, he's come away with a sack, and that he's been a boogeyman here. And so the Broncos have to avoid Max Crosby creating pressure, and then obviously Bo Nix trying to force the football into tight windows with pressure on him, because you can't afford to turn the football over. In a game on Thursday Night Football, short week, you can't overlook anybody. I think that's going to be the biggest key. And to be able to take that pressure off of Bo to have to do all this, I think you just have to have complementary football with the run game here. J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, these guys have showcased the ability to be effective. J.K.'s more of the effective ground guy. I think R.J. Harvey certainly can be, but R.J.'s been a really big weapon here for the Broncos out of the backfield as a pass catcher. Sean Payton has been looking for his joker for quite some time. He's got that guy here in Harvey, who's obviously got a handful of receiving touchdowns, obviously brought them back last week, had one against the Houston Texans. They love trying to isolate him in one-on-one matchups against linebackers because he just has the speed and the physicality to beat those guys in some of these situations here. I'll be curious to see how the Raiders defense plays Cortland Sutton, because a large portion of this year, teams have been playing press outside coverage with the corners and having a safety play over the top and inside. They're really trying to take away Cortland Sutton. And then it's really the focus on, Pat Bryant, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, can these guys go out there and make plays? Evan Ingram at tight end hasn't had a lot of volume so far this season. If they can get him going, I think things open up well for them. Defensively, I'm with you, Q. I think the Broncos have to find a way to get after Geno Smith, continue the trend of disrupting the passer. I mean, the Broncos pass rush is very unique because Q, they're not necessarily sending a lot of crazy 5-man rushes. They'll do it. Vance Joseph will send 5, 6, sometimes 7. He's diabolical sometimes the way that he does it. But primarily, the Broncos have been getting home consistently with 4 players. And that's obviously on your outside. You got Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, but then you got Zach Allen and you got John Franklin Myers. If one of those guys gets a double team, the other one gets a one-on-one, they're finding ways to win those matchups. The Broncos pass rush is very lethal, and that's going to be key this week, especially without having Pat Surtain. If you can try to get to Geno Smith quickly before he can get the ball to Brock Bowers and maybe Trey Tucker on a couple of downfield shots and these other guys in the short to intermediate, the Broncos will have a chance to win this game. And I think also complementary football, special teams. Denver's special teams unit last week, Q, they played terribly in terms of their coverage. They're 31st right now in the NFL in kick return yards against right now. They didn't have Marvin Mims last week. Michael Bandy, who filled in for him, had a muffed punt that led to points here for the Houston Texans right before halftime. They got to play better on that side of the ball here. They have yet to play a full game of complementary football. This could be the week where they get that, but they cannot overlook the Raiders. This, in my opinion, could be a trap game here for the Broncos.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, man. It really will, because, look, a lot of the things that you just said that the Broncos do really well, the Raiders don't do very well, right? So it could end up becoming one of those stand in the middle of the field and fights and whoever's got the best haymakers, whoever's got the one that can be the knockout blow is going to win this game. Look, it feels like the advantage, and I know the advantage is definitely for Denver. Obviously, they're leading the AFC West for a reason. It's in Denver, so it's also going to play a factor in this game. And that pass rush, man, that pass rush really worries me. I think you're going to see a lot of, 6 offensive linemen out there have a, offensive lineman report as a tight end. I think you're going to see some of that. They've been putting Alex Kappa out there. They got to do whatever they can to protect Geno Smith, because, look, there's one pass, 2 passes a game where Geno is Geno. You know what I mean? Like, you see that pass coming, you're like, oh, man. So he's got to avoid the Genos. And he had one of those last week to start the third quarter where he just threw the ball way too far across the field. And he was staring down Michael Mayer, and he got picked. And so it's one of these, situations after another. And that's the reason why, he's leading the league or tied with the most interceptions in the league right now. It's just not good. So he's going to have to protect the ball at all costs as well.
Well, it all boils down to Thursday night football, prime time action in the Mile High City between 2 teams with such a storied rivalry. Make sure you continue to check out Locked On Raiders if you're a member of Raiders Nation, Locked On Broncos if you're a member of Broncos Country, as we'll have you covered, obviously, with this preview, but post-game coverage as well here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Q, it's always great being able to sit down. We're going to be doing one of these here in a few weeks as well, because I think the Broncos and the Raiders, I think you play week 14 in Vegas. So you're going to have a little bit of a 2 shows here between us in the next handful of weeks here.
There it is. There it was. That is the crossover edition, storylines, matchups, and, of course, keys to victory for both the Denver Broncos and the Raiders. And so normally we have the keys to victory show. That was basically it, since they do play tonight, right? Thursday night football kicking off week 10. So coming up tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll talk about the game. Right? What happened? Did the Raiders find a way to get a W, go on the road and get the win? Or did they take that L to the Denver Broncos? And with the way that the Broncos have that pass rush, the way they get to the quarterback, I don't feel good about this game, but there's a reason why they play the game. So, of course, we'll be here to talk about it coming up on tomorrow. So look forward to that for sure. Another preview if you want to have it. Of course, we got the Raiders Squad Show later on this morning. Lincoln Kennedy, Chantel Chan, and myself will give you some more of a preview of this game. We'll have a bunch of different storylines that we'll talk about, 1 hour long, 1 hour strong. And so I'll give you everything that you can to get you ready for Thursday night football. But we'll be here to talk about what happened on tonight, and we'll do that tomorrow. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.